Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Riverdale. So in the aftermath of everything, you have Archie planning out the war front while everyone else is still kind of dealing in the aftermath of everything. So there's the whole Betty and Polly situation of... Obviously, Betty's frustrated by, it's like, right, now she finally got her sister back, and now their mom got murdered, and now she doesn't know what to do with all this anger, because Polly was like, right, she's in it, don't say she's in a better place, because it's like, it doesn't matter where she is, she should be here with us, now that we could all potentially be together again. And she's angry and frustrated, and that's, because I think Polly's kind of let a lot of those worldly things kind of go just because having been to heaven, the hereafter, and now being back, she's a little more filled with grace, and I think the situation is Betty quite isn't. It's just, I think no matter what Betty does, that darkness will always be a part of her, very... because I've got Kingdom Hearts on the mind, very Riku-esque. Like, you don't have to give up this. Maybe it's always hard to say, because sometimes it's like, yeah, that darkness brings, that light and darkness in you is what makes you who you are. The fact is that you balance the two, that one, like, the darkness doesn't ever completely corrupt you. So maybe that could work to her advantage. The fact is, despite, her being like, seeing, like, that positive aura around herself, she still has a little bit of that darkness in her, considering everything later on. Obviously, Kevin's still dealing with the aftermath of his dad's death, but luckily, Moose was able to sneak back into Riverdale, so he doesn't kind of have to go through this alone. Plus, he has Fangs and Tony's support, too, because, everything Tom had done wasn't on his own choices. It was, Percival controlling him, so it's not like they blame Tom for any of that. And obviously Archie, Uncle Frank, I didn't even cross my mind last episode to think about that, but it's like, right, his uncle's only family, obviously he's got in Riverdale left and everything, but also, his uncle was there for him. His uncle was a very important part of his life, being there for him after, filling a little bit of that void to some extent when Fred died. So losing his, but obviously for Archie, it's like, right, my uncle was a soldier too. He knew kind of what the outcome could be. And if he was here right now, he'd tell me to focus on the living, focus on winning this fight. But it's not going to be the easiest thing. And so him and Veronica decide, hey, let's try and make a deal with Percival and see what we can make of that to kind of get the bodies back so that Cheryl can resurrect them with the Phoenix Flames. But talking to everyone else is like, well, we don't know what that bastard's going to want in turn. It's like, well, we could give him half of Riverdale and have Riverdale go back to being divided between the North and South. I'm like, man, I actually forgot that was a thing, because Riverdale's been so there's no North and South anymore. To some extent, I guess it was you could almost borderline because eventually it became the Ghoulies and the Serpents. So that was almost that, but Riverdale isn't separated like it was. So I actually kind of completely forgot about that till they brought that up. But other than that, they're we're not going to concede on that. We're also not going to let him get Baby Anthony because that's what he wants. So what are they going to do? Because obviously they also know he's going to want their surrender. But Tabitha says that this is one of the outcomes she saw, where Veronica, while they're making the deal at the Babylonium, ends up killing him, shooting him. Turns out he's recruited. The Ghoulies are back in full force. And in Twyla, because she's the only one that's still alive, it's like, take a better look. And we see Dr. Croto Jr. We also see Weatherby. Basically, everyone there are residents of Riverdale. It's like, right, he can't get his supernatural army, the dead with the ghost train, because that's been stopped. But he figured, right, I have a whole army here for me that can be under my sway. And nothing they offered him was satisfactory enough, because it's like, you want to surrender yourself to me, Archie? I don't need to make a deal. I have this weapon that will mace. I was wondering if he's going to. I was like, well, because we know Mjolnir's a hammer, so I was almost like, didn't he say it was forged by Thor or something like that? And I'm like, I was like, oh, is it supposed to be a different version of Mjolnir? But I'm like, he said it's not, it's just a mace. I don't know if it had a specific name. Obviously, this network which is connected to the DC universe. When I see a mace, all I can think of are the Hulks, whether it's Hulk Girl, Hulk Man, whatever the case may be. But that's what immediately came to my mind. But Percival wasn't willing to deal, but he gave the bodies back, and I was like, okay, the way he was talking, I was like, what did you do? He gave them back without their heads, and without the heads, you need the complete bodies to do the resurrection. So, yeah, it's like, yeah, they stopped my bringing the dead back, screwing up my army situation. I figured I might as well kind of poke a hole in their plans too, so. Because he knew immediately what they'd try and do. It's like, right, Archie and the other ones came back to life, so it's like, right, you're going to try and do that same trick too, so. But aside from all of that, Percival also had his own personal planet place where he took control of four very specific people. He took control of Reggie and made him use the knife that could hurt Archie against him. Poor Archie, dude. He got it hard. He got stabbed. Then when he was trying to apply pressure to kind of choke and knock Reggie out, Reggie got in a good couple stabs in his side too. It's like, Jesus. Then Veronica has to deal with her abuelita, her grandmother, showing up. And I was like, at first I was like, oh, it's probably not her grandmother. It's someone pretending to be her grandmother. At first I was about to say oh, could this be about Geraldo? But I'm like, oh no, stupid. It's about her son that Veronica murdered, Hiram. And she goes on her revenge path. And I was like, oh, it's going to suck if Veronica's going to have to kill her grandmother. But she doesn't. She just uses a paralytic. Her grandmother apologizes for it later on, but I'm like, what was that conversation like? Did Veronica go did she not have that conversation with her grandmother because that was just Percival in control, so she doesn't really remember. So just knowing that she knew she had to hurt Veronica. So the question is, did Veronica go okay, so we're going to have that tough conversation. Yeah, I did murder Daddy. Or is it going to be a thing of, yeah, that was just Percival lying to you and she's just going to wait longer to find? I don't know how she handled that. Because do correct me. I don't think they had that conversation this episode. So that is an awkward conversation. It might even be the thing of, honestly, with the way Hiram was running things, maybe even his mother was like, hey, if anyone was going to be the death of him, and I'm glad it was you. If anyone was going to take him down, of course it had to be family. I'm still surprised, too, because there's still the Hermosa situation, too. To be fair, she did hire that assassin that she hired to kill her dad. Hermosa gave him more money to kill Veronica, but that kind of got done. But we haven't heard from Hermosa since then, so I'm curious if she's still on the warpath. Kind of a weird... if she ever tries anything, she'd have to try something directly, because I was about to say, Veronica's got the poison on her hands, so there's that. Betty gets confronted by a zombified, as she said, Patchman of Glenn. So it's like, oh, of course that'd be the person. I would have kind of expected it to be TBK, but I guess it's almost even more ironic for it to be Glenn's the one that ends up coming after her. And she proceeds to dismember him. And it's like, yeah, his separated, he got cut to pieces, and she cut him to pieces yet again. After getting reassembled. So it's like, yeah, and his body parts are twitching. And how nonchalant she was about it. That's what I was talking about earlier, where I was like, yeah, there's still that darkness in Betty. Once again, I think it is for Betty. It's just not going to be like, oh, you're just going to be all light. I don't think that's possible for her. I think Polly, because she's been to the hereafter, she's kind of been wiped clean, so she's very angelic and pure. Betty's not. She's still here on Earth, so it's very symbolic of right, there's good and bad to everyone. You're not just one thing in this world. Well, that's also complicated because, there is pure evil in this world. So that's why I'm kind of chalking that up to. But it's just Betty's nonchalantness about, to be fair, he was already dead. So you're just, re-deading him. And even at that point, he was still kind of, twitching despite being dismembered. So. And the fourth one was Cheryl and her brother. Sadly, she ended up killing JJ in the process, which I'm like, how's Polly going to feel about that? Sad, too, because the twins just got... Dagwood returned from the dead. Obviously, Nana Rose probably... they had time together in heaven, but it's Veronica... Cheryl feels bad. She's like, right, I shouldn't have done this. I shouldn't have brought you back. So, I guess that's kind of sad, too, because that would almost mean, right, to some extent, Betty might get her happily ever after, but Cheryl might not. Well, she still has her Nana Rose. They've got Dagwood back. She has her cousin Polly back, so there's that. And, I'm curious. I think Polly's going to be at the very least, Jason's back in heaven, either she's going to ask to be reunited with him, because eventually she probably just wants. It's probably going to be a thing of, in the season finale, she'll probably go back to was it Sweet Hereafter, just for the purposes of, like, right, she wanted to make sure, she needed Betty to be okay, and like knowing, like, okay, Betty's okay and Mom's okay, now we get to properly say goodbye, and you know where I am, that everything's okay. That's all she cares about, making sure her family's okay, and she's like, I need to go back to where I belong. So cosmically, everything might kind of rebalance itself. There still might be backlash from doing this, but we'll see. Jason returning to the dead, and her potentially, because at least Dagwood, Nana Rose, Archie, and all of them, and Jughead, they weren't meant to be dead, so that's why there's a loophole with them. But the others is like, no, like it was kind of meant to be. So. But when that was all said and done, I'd forgotten about Archie's dog having healing properties. Because I remember, I was like, it's not until Tabitha brought it up, I was like, oh, right, because he got crushed and his legs were broken, but then they healed. And apparently his saliva's got healing properties too. So it's like, hey, I wonder, did that help putting that? Oh, no, because I was about to say, did it help put the heads, attaching the heads back to the bodies? It probably doesn't count when they're dead. But it's like, right, Betty was there with Dr. Curdle Jr. when he was like repairing, like sewing the heads back on. So it was like, no. He didn't help in that regard. I thought it was interesting that Tony came up with the idea of like, well, they already met because of the Sweet Hereafter. They were able to meet Baby Anthony, see Baby Anthony older. So it's like, right, he is going to be the ultimate weapon against Percival, because at the very least, he can because he's immortal and can't die either, he can go toe-to-toe with Percival for all eternity. And it's like, at the very least, there'll always be someone, no matter when the dust settles, there'll always be someone there to match you. So, Tabitha creates like a special time bubble. Well, she time looped her Riverdale counterpart, so now she's creating a time loop space so that Baby Anthony grows up. So once again, then your brain starts going like, right, is this technically him, basically you're fast forwarding all the way throughout his life? Like, I guess it's like, right, he's a baby, he's absorbing everything, but now it's like all of a sudden he has like all that knowledge as a baby, what he knew could understand, he was picking up as a baby, but now he has the like an older person's, a young adult's brain to understand it. Or is it kind of like that click thing of like, oh, basically he was living his life on autopilot, and it's like, oh, this is some version of himself that was living some life that's aware of person. You know, that's why I'm like, I don't know, because even with the aftermath, because you also have to play into the fact, well, it could just be him from the future. It could be like, hey, like, she time traveled him, like basically aging him up, but it's like, yeah, it's like he lived his life, but it's just on autopilot, and it's just the world around him isn't happening, but every event in his life that happened is happening. Because maybe this is the Baby Anthony because he would survive the comet, later on, like the destruction, that the apocalypse that Tabitha saw, he would survive it. He'd be the only one in Riverdale that can survive it, right? As I kind of gave it away to comment and stuff, but part of me was wondering, like, could this be a Baby Anthony before that? I mean, is this an Anthony timeline-wise before? Like, once again, the logistics of aging him up and, like, how him knowing what he knows. It's like, it's not like, that's why I'm like, I don't know. I'm probably like thinking too much about it. I definitely am, but it was just something that was kind of sparking in the back of my head, or just like that. But the raid on the Babylonium, and also Percival making it clear, like, oh, I don't care about these people. Yeah, they're newbies. I don't need them to be trained fighters. They're just cannon fodder. You, my dear Twyla, you're exactly the same as well. So it's like, it's just like the Ghoulies have always been like that. Right, try to choose the winning side. That's the only reason why Twyla's here. It's like, right, she got her group back to some extent, the Ghoulies 2.0, but even then it's kind of like, wow, you were one twisted SOB, like, just kind of using us however you want to. But luckily they took everyone down. Baby Anthony was about to can't kill him, but can at least hurt Percival. Problem is, though, I love all these blades around, because, once again, just CW-wise, it makes you think of, like, the weapons that could hurt, like, the originals. Like, you need a white oak and red oak in, spoilers, Hope's case. But also makes you think of, like, it's not a one, well, there was a, God, what was it? I guess, like, the angel daggers and Supernatural in that same regard, and the demon knife. Just a few examples that come to mind. But other than that, him teleporting away, it was like, hey, we've seen someone else recently teleporting and being butt naked in the process. It's like, yeah, teleporting, making it so you have to leave your clothes behind. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Once again, it's like, these are shows that are probably not aware of each other. I don't want to spoil what it is I'm referencing, but if you've seen what if you've seen a certain show, you know what I'm talking about when it comes to a certain character teleporting. More recently, but I'm like, yeah, just funny that enough is just like, oh yeah, just similar times. It's like, I doubt they were ever influenced by each other. I mean, I doubt Riverdale was influenced by that aspect. You know, maybe that's how teleportation typically is in some. Maybe that might not just be this particular thing I'm thinking of, but maybe other things have kind of hinted at teleportation being used that way. Either way. So that plan didn't go the way they wanted to. And obviously you also have Jughead kind of accepting his death. Well, first and foremost, because, well, he decided to stay, despite Tabitha being like, you have the power to open portals to anywhere, but he won't go, because he loves Tabitha, he's not going to leave her behind. He's also not going to leave his friends and everyone else high and dry during this. This is meant to be where he's meant to be, and yeah, he might die, but there's always chance, that's what he came back for, that hope, that chance, so... but ultimately, he's also resigned himself to death. It's like, if this is what happens, it's meant to be. Like, I've accomplished so much. He fell in love. He wrote a comic and everything. He's been to a parallel universe. How many people in this universe, in this series, can say that? But that gave Tabitha an idea, which I was kind of leaning towards that previously. I was like, right, if you can get him back to Riverdale, wouldn't that kind of put him in a situation where Mr. Cypher could get him, but he still have that pesky immortality. So they set up their plan. This is kind of their Hail Mary. And so it comes down to Archie with the bat, because, of course, I love that all still coming full circle. That being his, go-to weapon. Him going toe-to-toe with Percival. Kind of getting his ass handed to him, but then everyone else kind of gangs up on him. It's like, yeah, almost like Riverdale curb stomp to some extent. But Percival, I love that, reversing them, making Cheryl frozen, Betty losing her sight, turning Reggie into a dummy, turning Archie into a literal Iron Man, a man of a steel man or whatever. Who was the other one? Oh, and Veronica literally getting poisoned by her own poison. And it finally came down to, which I love the imagery, not imagery, but the parallel of, right, Cypher and, was it Raphael having their, chess match in Riverdale, but also in this world, it's kind of this match it's a psychic match between Jughead and Percival. He's like, oh yeah, your powers are strong and everything, but he never really fully knew what Jughead was capable of. He knew about, what you're able to do mentally and stuff, because Jughead only just found out last episode the full understanding of what his power actually is. So while they're doing their mental thing, I wonder is Jughead going to be okay, those torn magazines, maybe, right, Tabitha has those memories too, so whatever was torn up could always be rebuilt to some extent, or maybe Jughead could go into his own mind and kind of potentially tape those comics back together. But the moment he was so full of himself, oh yeah, I've won, stepping into Pops, the ghosts are here to watch this. Yeah, when you stepped in there, in actuality, we went to Rivervale. This is Pops in Rivervale. Oh, and while we were also in your battle, your body was left vulnerable. Hey, all of the Rivervale versions of my friends, yeah, fill them in about how you were probably you're taking over our world, but you were trying to take over theirs and come and kill all of them. So they've got the special weapons. They stabbed you. Tabitha takes you back to before you made the deal with Mr. Cypher, but he's like, yeah, doesn't matter. And I love that he tried to find a loophole around it. It's like, hey, that means I'm back in time before I made the deal, so you still can't have my soul. But I love the Mr. Cypher being like, yeah, but once again, it's the devil's game. You don't cheat death and the devil. They always get what they're owed in some shape or form. And it's like, right, when you're playing their game, you were able to kind of escape this, find your loophole for 400 years. Well, he had a loophole built in. Oh, this contract is in perpetuity across any timeline, any continuity past present, or future. So, yeah, your soul is mine. But he had one last middle finger, and him being like, oh, like, if I can't have Riverdale, no one will. I was like, oh, it's about the comet. The comet's going to crash into Riverdale. The way things were set up, I was assuming that's how everything was always meant to be. That because they kept being like, oh, why is he doing this like a day in advance? Because like the comet wasn't going to actually. Well, he's been feeding off the power of the comet because it's been relatively close enough for a week. But like the comet doesn't actually pass over until the next day. So like, why is he trying to end things now? Well, he's now pushing it so that the comet hits Riverdale. I mean, granted, he won't be around to deal with it. And once again, Anthony, who's still an adult now, I'm assuming after this is all said and done, they're going to rewind that. Maybe not. But even Jughead was trying to figure out, why am I still alive? Like, every version of this you've ever seen included me dying. But it's like, well, what helped their advantage this time is, in Riverdale, the supernatural runs rampant. It's like, I've seen all the possibilities in Riverdale, but not Rivervale. Like, Rivervale was the X factor I wasn't aware of, that no one was aware of accounting in, and the rules are a little loopy there. Like, because of the supernatural, it kind of became the X factor in all of this. So maybe that's why Jughead's alive. But now it's like, no, what's probably going to be the case is Jughead's going to have to sacrifice himself for this. He can open portals, so maybe if he pushes himself, he can open a portal and teleport the comet somewhere. I don't know if it'd be able to work like that, but I would assume he'd have to put like a giant portal all around Riverdale to protect it from this. I mean, it makes you wonder, like, pops in your head, like, you don't think he'd have to send it to Riverdale, would he? Would he have to, like, destroy one universe to save this one? Will it have to be that type of sacrifice? Or will it be kind of a Crisis on Infinite Earths, or I guess even borderline Secret Wars? Where things kind of, like, collapse into one universe type of thing. So, maybe that's what's going to happen here. Maybe that's also going to be, like, the reset button. Like, him doing all of that might be the reset button where... Oh, God damn, I was about to spoil something. I'm like, it's been a couple years, so I don't know if... It's spoilers for the end of Fringe. Basically, the 5th and final season kind of got undone because Bishop... Wasn't that his character name? Or was that their last name? I don't remember. John Noble's character. It's been on. I should go back and rewatch. I've not seen Fringe since it ended. Because I binged like the first 3 or 4 seasons back to back. And then like I watched the final season like live when it came out. Either way. He kind of he went to the future and kind of undid things ever playing out the way they did in the final season, right? So because of that, none of the final season technically is like one of those storylines. So what if that technically ends up being it? And Jughead is dead, but everything else is kind of back to normal, no supernatural powers, and just that how you kind of get the hard reset to some extent upon all of this, and Jughead makes the ultimate sacrifice and he's gone. Or maybe he'll survive. I don't know. I mean, you do have magical people here. You do have Cheryl and Heather, you know, who end up discovering all of this, but it's like, they probably can't come up with anything that would be the end result of stopping a comet from being the end-all be-all to everything, because there's nothing that's going to survive this, once again, except for Anthony. So how do you counter that? Especially when everyone, like, there was happy reunions, but also everyone trying to figure out, where do we go from here next? What happens next? So many questions. The bad guy's been dealt with, but it's left them vulnerable to what this is. So how this plays out, 24 hours to the end of everything. So the question is, what do they do? We'll ultimately have to wait and see. The next episode, as I was talking about before, is the season finale. So it's going to be wild to see how this plays out. And once again, is how much stays, how much potentially gets reset in all of this. I'm so curious to see what they do, because obviously the season finale, because we know Riverdale's coming back for a 7th and final season. What does it set up for the final season? Once again, is it going to be like superpowers and everything, or is it going to be like everyone remembers but they no longer have their powers and we're just going on about life? It's just like, yeah, this will be like Riverdale's a little secret that the outside world would never be aware of, or is it going to be, like I said, because I feel like it has to all go back to that Riverdale thing of like, right, Riverdale Jughead being the one to warn Betty and Archie. Like, that's what broke these universes into where they are. So that has to be undone. So, and that could also be the thing too. That explosion maybe it's not Archie and Betty that would have died. Maybe Jughead dies in that explosion. They're at the heat of it, but maybe they would have gotten out. Because I think they find the bomb at the last second, but they could have gotten out in time, and maybe Jughead just happened to be in a different spot. I don't know. I feel like he's still... maybe just things shifted and played a little differently. But I feel like they're the ones that more likely would have died. Probably Betty. Which would be sad, too, because you also have to think about the Veronica, Betty, and Jughead, and the Archie thing, because it's like, right, just as many possibilities for him to end up with Betty, there are just as many possibilities for him to end up with Veronica, so maybe some of that could play into that. I have no idea. I'm so curious to see where all this ends up taking us, like I said, into the season finale and how the season wraps up. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.